October meeting of the Wyoming Board of Education. Before we start, I wanted to say, kind of repeat what I have said each time. As of this evening, we still have a mask mandate in this district. It has various parts to it that I guess are kind of confusing to some. So for this evening, the mask would be in place because we are in the building and we have visitors and children. So with that, I will go ahead and call this meeting to order and ask for a roll call.
Mrs. Barger? Here. Mr. Buckner?
Here.
Mr. Thomas?
Here.
Mrs. G? Here. Mrs. Allen?
Here. Thank you. Please join me with the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. All right, the next thing on the list is recognition of the public. We have enough names that I'm going to ask you to limit your remarks to 2.5 minutes. Dr. Whiteley will keep track. If she stops you, please finish your sentence. You don't have to be abrupt and leave immediately. We are here to hear everyone, and that is the purpose of this. Okay. So I just want to go over the policy and the protocol we've been following. First and foremost is that this is a public meeting. This is not a public meeting, but a meeting held in public. And the definition of that, which I've been asked to explain, people have been asking me to say this, is what this is. This is a regular meeting of the Board of Education. All of our important work, all of our votes, everything we do has to happen out in the open, in a meeting that we have scheduled, that we have announced, and that we have published an agenda for. So that's what this meeting is tonight. This is not a forum. This is not a dialogue. We had a wonderful session just a couple of days ago on anxiety. We've got our community conversations coming up. First one is in November. Those will be dialogues. Those will be back and forth. This is, however, a chance for every citizen of Wyoming to make a statement. And the statement, because this is an official meeting, is recorded and it becomes a part of our minutes. So what we will ask of you tonight is absolutely, if you are a resident of Wyoming or an employee and or, you are welcome to speak. We'll say 2 to 3 minutes at the most. Please offer your information. And no, the board will not engage in a dialogue with you. What we normally do is we write down, if someone asks a question, and then afterwards someone in this group takes that question on and gets back to you. Or sometimes, in fact, I would say most of the time, people really just want to have an opportunity to speak out. And that's what this is all about. So just a couple more of the rules. Please state your name and your address before you begin. As a courtesy, let's make sure we are kind to each other, and we also, not to disparage, especially employees or children. Finish your last statement once you've been told your time is up. The last thing would be then also to, we will not react, so just so you're aware of that, we are, however, taking notes and we'll be paying attention to everything that you say. All right, we have a list, and I think what I'd like to do is call the first person and the second person so that they're ready to go. The first person is Cynthia Meese, and she will be followed by Erica Grayson. And we have a microphone set up right there.
Good evening. My name is Cynthia Meese, and I live at 1320 Stone Hill Court. I have been Director of College Counseling at Wyoming City Schools since 2012. I truly love my job because I have the privilege of working with high school students when they are on the cusp of entering the world as adults and making their mark. As important as that work is, my most important job is that I'm a parent. My daughters attended Wyoming City Schools starting in the 2nd grade, and they are now juniors in college. My son is currently in 8th grade at middle school. As a parent, I firmly believe that we cannot turn our backs on Wyoming's Belonging and Inclusion Collaborative, because our children are going to leave our homes, and they are going to leave Wyoming, and they are going to be making their way in a world that is increasingly diverse and complex. There is no going back, nor should we want to. Like other tumultuous moments in our past, pushing through these challenging times with positive action is only going to make the world a better place for our children. Therefore, it is imperative that we give them the skills to navigate these complexities, just as it is imperative that they know how to write a grammatically correct sentence, analyze text, or solve algebraic equations. Okay, maybe not that bad part. Sorry, teachers. These lessons are difficult. They are nuanced, and they need to happen in an age-appropriate manner, which is why the training and guidance that is a part of the Belonging and Inclusion Initiative is crucial. To do nothing, to pretend the world is not a very different place than it was even 5 years ago, is not an option if we want our students to not only be prepared for college and career, but to thrive in college and career. Mr. Webber, Dr. Whiteley, Board of Education members, thank you for your commitment to moving Wyoming City Schools forward, and for your courageous and steadfast leadership during the most challenging years facing public education in our lifetimes. Thank you.
After Erica, we will have Nikki DeWitt.
I don't know if I want to go behind her. She was so eloquent. I'm going to be very brief. I'm Erica Grayson, 1200 Springfield Pike. I'm not sure why I got to give my address. I'm a 17-year resident here. I have 2 graduates of Wyoming City Schools, and I have a current junior. First off, I want to thank Mr. Webber, Superintendent, the board, administrators and teachers, and the counselors for all the work that you've done. You are so appreciated. To the board, I want to publicly acknowledge I support your efforts on diversity, equity, and inclusion. To our community, I acknowledge that we may not agree on what's best for our school-age children. But what I'm hoping we can agree upon is to keep politics out of the decision-making process and how we interact with our school board. Thank you.
After Nikki DeWitt, Chandra Napora.
I didn't sign this, the other guy. I'm Nikki DeWitt. I live 9369 Flemington Drive. If you do not know me, I started the color guard program here in 1980, and I coached until 2009. I then restarted the middle school program back up in 2016 when my daughter and her friends were in 6th grade and wanted to try color guard, and I continue to this day to coach both the middle school and high school teams. But I didn't come tonight to talk to you as a coach. I'm speaking to you tonight as a parent, but also as a spouse of a teacher in this district. My husband is in his 26th year teaching in this district. He has many colleagues who have taught here for that period of time, and some longer than that. Many of these people we consider our friends. In those 26 years, we've been through multiple building principals, multiple board members, union representatives, and superintendents. The previous 2 superintendents were not the best fit for our district. In my opinion, sure, people feel different. Over the course of their tenures, relationships between the board office, the board, and the teachers broke down. It was slow at first, but during the last administration, it increased quite a bit. I saw my spouse and his colleagues go from being able to have input in how they taught their classes to being told to teach certain ways and not given any tools to assist them. They were simply told, this is what you have to do, figure it out on your own. This was frustrating for all, the teachers, the building administrators who had to enforce this, for the students and the parents. There was always something new that had to be done, and things were constantly changing, even in subjects like math, where math does not change, it's math. I saw my husband struggle on a daily basis, lose his love for teaching. I saw the same with many of his colleagues, to the point where many were considering another career or another district. To watch these people I care about struggle so much about something that they sincerely love to do was so heartbreaking, and it really boiled down to one person. And it wasn't just the teachers, parents also had issues. The previous superintendent didn't answer calls or emails or answer parent questions. Multiple times, parents tried to get information. There were meetings scheduled and were pushed to the side or ignored. Trust was completely broken down with our predecessor and the district, both the staff and the parents. We lost good teachers, either because their positions had been cut and not replaced, which made class sizes larger, or some teachers just gave up and left, and some were retirement age and hadn't planned to retire, but just said, well, hell with it, I'm gonna retire. To give you an idea, my daughter's grade social studies class was so large, she had to sit facing the window instead of facing the teacher because that was the only way her desk fit in the classroom. And that is not what we argue. The distrust was so bad that a group of parents and teachers started meeting to see if as a cohesive group, we could find a way forward and find a way to work with the board and office. Then our previous superintendent announced her retirement. This board in front of you, at least most of them, they took the time to listen to the district. Questionnaires were sent out and focus groups were done. What did we as the residents of Wyoming want from our next superintendent? They spent a good deal amount of time listening to all of us and found our perfect match.
Nikki, your allotted time has
Okay.
lapsed.
In all the years I've been in this district, I've never seen someone willing to work with us. Thank you to all of you for all of you.
After Shaka Napur, Martin Stevens, and after that, Martin Skidmore.
Hello, me again. I'll keep coming as long as the meetings keep happening over here. I have three things to say, and as those who heard me speak before know, I'll speak quickly, and heads up, none of them relates to math, so that's exciting. Number one, you've all heard me speak in support of the board, as Nikki just did. Tonight, I want to raise my voice in support of the teachers. We have extraordinarily gifted, skillful, dedicated teachers here. They have my gratitude, my respect, and my trust. This board supports this administration supports those teachers, and these teachers support our children. The vitriol and misinformation being spread by folks who want to tear apart this chain of support is heard and felt by those on the front line. Attacks on this board, this administration, are ultimately attacks on those teachers, and it has gone on long enough. I wish I could throw a force field around them to shield them from this, but since I can't, I'll use my voice and my vote instead. Number two, why do I say trust? Because I trust them to be the highly skilled professionals they are, which includes the ability to navigate rough waters and to help our children learn to do the same. So my second point is I trust our teachers to develop and implement age-appropriate curricula through which our kids hone their reading, writing, math, speaking, thinking, and interpersonal skills. There's been an awful lot of talk about CRT. There will be more tonight, I'm sure. But we all know that it's propaganda, and it's pandering, and it's based on white fragility and fear of losing power. It is not being taught to our kindergartners. It's not being taught at all in this district. It's, I went to law school. It was taught in law school. That's where it's taught. Period. For those who think that they should be sitting where you all sit, in the pit or wherever you sit in the board meetings, so that they can stop this fictitious scourge, are going to be sorely disappointed, I fear, when they realize that you guys actually read spreadsheets, not Kimberly Crenshaw. So my point two is thank you for volunteering your time to read those spreadsheets, to listen to and engage with the best superintendent this district has seen in ages, and to support our teachers in developing and implementing the curricula they actually teach, in the face of them having to defend against a curriculum they do not. Point three, and this is related to 1 and 2, you all have fielded personal attacks that have been coming your way for many months with a professionalism that is particularly impressive in this environment. If those who think that CRT is the greatest evil facing our schools were being intellectually honest, they would say that what they are really upset about is not CRT, since, again, it's not actually being taught here. What they are really upset about is anyone daring to think, in the course of the day, or the course of a curriculum, have I thought about how this lesson, this moment, this event, is being experienced by Black kids, by trans kids, by gay kids, by kids with disabilities, and by white kids.
Ms.
And to the
Napora,
extent this board has any role in responding to this false narrative being propagated nationally and locally, it is, I implore, to continue to support our teachers in asking, have I thought about how this lesson, this moment, this event is being experienced by different kids differently, and how can I use this lesson, this moment, this event to do what I do best, which is have a part in developing happy, excited, engaged, challenged learners. Thank you.
night, and as we're working on college applications this weekend, I was just reflecting on how thankful I have been that my kids were in Wyoming City Schools. And I've recently come to understand the role that the superintendent and the board and the significant time commitment you each personally put in to enable us. So I wanted to say thank you. You know, you helped us safely navigate through the pandemic. I had my 2020 grad, you know, and my senior now. And then as I'm comparing their experience to that experience of other family and friends, I'm just so thankful for the experience my kids had within this district. I appreciate how our children are being taught a thorough, accurate, and fact-based history following Ohio State education standards. I want my children to continue to be in schools and communities that respect the humanity and dignity of every person, and in a learning environment where their voices are affirmed and valued and they have a sense of belonging. And so I want to thank you for all that you're doing for that. Thank you.
After this will be Alyssa Conti.
I'm going to put the microphone down if you don't mind, and I'll just speak loudly. I don't like the reverb. All right, my name is Marty Skidmore. I live at 59 Central Terrace. With school back in session, and hopefully the worst behind us, it might be easy to forget just how frightening much of the past 18 months have been. This is the first time I've spoken at a school board meeting in my life, but I just want to use this as an opportunity to publicly thank you. Thank you for I have not forgotten what the stakes were for all of us 1 year ago, particularly before a vaccine was available. Thank you for striking the right somber tone of messaging in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder. Thank you for providing age-appropriate resources on our district website from people who have dedicated their lives to anti-racist work. Thank you for not shying away from the word anti-racism and for not allowing others to caricature you as something that you are not. Thank you for handling the national strategy to inundate time-strapped school personnel with public records requests with such grace and professionalism. Thank you for not allowing teachers and students who engage in anti-racist work to be thrown under the bus, leaving them vulnerable to harassment from community members who have already shown propensity to do so. Thank you for trusting our teachers to handle topical content professionally and with providing them with the support when needed. Thank you for taking a science-based approach to decision-making. Thank you for knowing that while kids learn better in a 5 days a week schedule, that there are other considerations as well. And it should go without saying, but you know what else is not good for kids? Being cavalier with a deadly disease that is documented to have long-term effects, or being cavalier with a disease that could leave them orphaned before graduating. Thank you for putting safety measures in place that also protect our teachers. For not only should we remember that they have families of their own, but keeping them healthy is in the best interest of all of our kids. Thank you for realizing that our students are more than just a test score. Thank you for everything.
After Alyssa, Kathy Lowe, and then Cindy Peebles.
Hi, I'm Elisa Campy. I'm relatively new to Wyoming in that we've only lived here for about 4 years. Again, this is also the first time I'm speaking at the school board. The reason why I'm speaking is that I would just like to express my support for the board and for Tim Weber. I'm expressing my support in the hopes that you feel it during these very difficult times where you may not feel supported. Your steadfast leadership during the pandemic is inspirational. As a physician, I applaud you for following the advice of medical experts and keeping our kids, our teachers, and thus our family members and the vulnerable community members that we're in contact with safe. So I really appreciate you for that. One of the reasons why we moved to Wyoming and why a lot of you moved to Wyoming is because of the schools. And it's this educational excellence and the forward thinking of the board, the teachers, the staff, which is why we choose to live in Wyoming, why we chose to live in Wyoming, and why we're so proud to send our kids to this school. So thank you.
am Jackie Lowe. I live at 156 Fleming Road. And I just want to say that we agree that racism is wrong, and that we agree that we all want to have a robust, truthful telling of American history. And I agree with Cincy Needs that I want my kids to be able to face the challenges of the world with grace and strength. Our conflict is a worldview conflict. I want my kids to be able to face the challenges of the world with an empowered and strong worldview, I guess. Our conflict isn't about whether racism is wrong or whether students should belong. We believe racism is wrong. We feel our students should belong. But the worldview that emerged from the civil rights movement sought to redeem the promises of American equality and freedom. This civil rights worldview seeks to unite people of all colors and backgrounds with the desire to build a virtuous society that aspires to reach the ideals set forth in our Declaration and Constitution. The worldview that comes from the critical movement and has been taught in our higher academic institutions for decades, this worldview sees all societal discrepancies due to race and intersectionality. Instead of seeking to unite people, it's seeking to divide people and deconstruct, or tear down our foundational documents and institutions. Our Ohio Attorney General, David Yost, eloquently calls the civil rights perspective the King consensus and the critical perspective the Contra King movement. Is our motivation to unify or divide, build up or tear down? As a white woman who's married to a black man with 4 kids, I'm living what sociologists would call the realization of the civil rights movement and the American dream to unite people and to live in a society where people accept others. It's this Contra King racial upending of American values that people oppose and don't want to see in our schools, but it is here. The board asks, where can we improve our curriculum content? Do we have books and learning in classrooms that specifically deal with whiteness and racism and white supremacy? How can we go beyond the kindness aspect of our curriculum and social emotional learning to teach students to be anti-racist? The recent addition of the flex period is the implementation of social emotional learning to encourage anti-racist behaviors. At the September planning meeting, our high school principal said one of the great things about having the speaker come into the flex period is she's going to be able to soft roll ways of support, social emotional without even talking about social emotional.
Kathy, your allotted time is up.
The reason I oppose the idea of anti-racism is that Ibram X. Kendi himself, the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist, says, the only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. This Contra King worldview does not end discrimination, it perpetuates it. And I would like to know why we are not encouraging the civil rights King consensus worldview in our curriculum. That's a question. Thank you.
Cindy next, and then Amy Webb, followed by Melissa.
Hello, I'm Cindy Peebles. I'm at 17 Walnut. I have been a resident here for 9 years, and I am in my second year on the advisory committee for the board. Love that role, but I'm here speaking to you as a mother of a parent, as a parent of a ninth grader. My ninth grader is a bright and conscious daughter who navigates a world where diversity is complex and where she is often the minority. Today, her best source of information for how she addresses a complex world of diversity is from me, but she spends most of her waking hours of the day at school. So, to navigate that world, it's important that she be introduced to concepts of diversity, educational and interpersonal, such that she, along with her peers, can learn those concepts together. My daughter is often in a place where she is educating others. This happens in things such as math, or things such as interpersonal relations with people who are diverse. I can be okay with my daughter helping someone learn math, or someone helping her learn her math. Though I'm often afraid you're both just learning how to do it, and you're trying to teach each other. That's scary to me. The same is true with concepts of diversity. I'd like the teachers to be accountable for that. I want to express my support for Tim and the board and the teachers who do this every day. I want to express my support for the concepts for creating a safe and inclusive education. This includes not only aspects of interpersonal relationships, but history that is thorough, inclusive, and recognizes all the accuracy of history. I encourage us to abandon or avoid the divisive term critical race theory. This is not something that I believe is happening in the school system. This relates more to aspects of race as it relates to legislation and policing, and that's not what I believe is happening in this school. I encourage us to focus more directly on aspects of history, because it is those aspects that are more important and are more, not just for people who are minorities, but people who are not, such that they're learning together, rather than having my daughter or any children teaching each other how to manage it. It can help, but we really need experts to do that, and I'm today thankful that there's such a great school board doing that for our kids. Please continue.
Amy Webb, followed by Melissa Erickson, followed by Rhonda Evans.
Hi, my name is Amy Webb, and I live at 7 Lincoln Lane, and I have 3 children in the district. I wanted to get up and thank the board for their service and commitment in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion in our district so that all of our children have the opportunity to succeed. As I've said, I have 3 daughters, and one of them has a disability. Her needs often require special consideration and problem solving to have equitable access to education, as well as to clubs and other extracurricular activities. And I appreciate the district and all the efforts they have made to make sure her needs and her rights are being met. What I know about providing an equitable and accessible education for my daughter and for all children is that it starts with open minds and open hearts long before a ramp is built or an accommodation is made. While we all know that critical race theory is not being taught in our schools, it concerns me greatly that many people in our community liken any discussion of diversity, equity, and inclusion as critical race theory, and even worse, categorize these teachings as, quote, radical liberal policies. Just last week, when speaking with one of the non-incumbent candidates, I was shocked to hear her describe some of the children's books in our district that teach about diversity as, quote, divisive and part of a liberal agenda. In addition to being a special needs mom, I am a children's book author, and I write books that center on, you guessed it, diversity, inclusion, and equity. I can assure you that children's books of this nature do not divide. In fact, they do the opposite. They help our children relate to each other and build bridges of friendship and inclusion. Further, I reject the implication that children's books about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and teaching these things in general in our school are part of a far-left radical ideology. It is not. These teachings are, in fact, moderate, moral teachings that can and should be embraced by people of all political affiliations. I know this is possible. And the reason I know this is possible is that just 2 weeks ago, I was a featured guest on the George W. Bush Presidential Center podcast, talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. My first book, When Charlie Met Emma, was selected by former First Lady Laura Bush to be on her 2021 summer reading list, along with other books like Mama and Me, This Is Your Time by Ruby Bridges, and Stella by Starlight by another Cincinnati author, Sharon Draper. All books that focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and all embraced by our Republican former First Lady. I am thankful to the board, to Tim Webber, for all, that you don't succumb to fear-based rhetoric that is divisive. I applaud you for your commitment to a high-quality education for all Wyoming students.
Amy, you're a tough act to follow.
Hold on 1 second. There's a flash on out there. I don't know if you can make sure that's.
Hi, my name is Melissa Erickson. I live at 115 Linden Drive. I have been a Wyoming resident for the past 9 years. I have a daughter at Elm and a son at the middle school. I would like to thank Mr. Webber and the current Board of Education members for being exceptional leaders when it has come to keeping our children safe during the pandemic. As both a physician and a mom, I respect the fact that they have continuously followed the science and recommendations put forth by public health experts. Second, I am here in support of Wyoming City Schools' mission for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I have heard recent concerns that some parents are opposed to current diversity efforts, labeling them as critical race theory. However, 2 recent experiences I've had point towards the school's promotion of inclusion and belonging at a developmentally appropriate level. The new principal at the primary schools has offered evening listening sessions for parents. Last month, I had the opportunity to ask her about the efforts that were currently being done at the primaries. She reported they were working to create a space where each child feels safe and free to take risks. This was in part facilitated by each classroom in the primary reading 2 books, All Are Welcome and The Coffee Bean for Kids. In the middle school, my son's 6th grade science teacher exposed students to breakthroughs in medicine and science specifically made by female scientists and scientists of color, many of whose achievements were ignored or suppressed. His take-home message was that these scientists not only had to put in the hard work to achieve these breakthroughs, but they also had to do so in an environment that, at best, was not set up to help them succeed, and at worst, was actively working against them. These lessons do not represent critical race theory. Rather, these lessons represent a commitment to teaching our children that they can help others feel that they belong, that they have the power to make a positive impact on our world, and that working to reduce obstacles for historically marginalized groups benefits every single one of us. I am grateful we have a leadership team that supports teachers who facilitate discussion on difficult, important topics to help our students grow, develop, and learn to think for themselves. Thank you.
All right, Rhonda Evans and then Scott Sparrow.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rhonda Evans. I live at 1410 Springfield Pike. I have 3 kids, 2 graduated up through the Wyoming system, and I have a senior right now. We've been here about 14 years, and when we first moved here, we've had several challenges in the school district, but with every one, I feel that the school district has really worked with us to get past them. And especially since Tim has come on board, I feel that we're heard like never before. I am a kidney transplant recipient. So when we were going through the pandemic and they were deciding what to do or what to not do for the kids, and they were constantly communicating with us, that meant a lot to me because I could not survive COVID. However, whenever I had a question or I had a concern over something that came out, I would send an email and I'd hear back from Tim, and at the time it was Adam, both of them, which helped a lot. Also, as far as the diversity and inclusion part of it, obviously I'm diverse, so there's no if, and, or but whether it's going to be important to me. So what I also think is important is that we understand that I know some people are concerned about learning history in perspective, but if we only know the Eurocentric version of it, then we don't understand the impact that it has on students of colors the LGBT community, women, people with disabilities, and there's more disabilities than just physical disabilities. So that's why understanding history in perspective is important. I'm not going to address the CRT because you can't address something that has no definition. But what does have a definition is that we want to make our students strong students, ready to go out into the world and have an understanding of what they do and how what they say affects people other than them, and that we just can't make them see one vision, because even if you get what you want, they still have to go out there, and they're not going to be prepared either. And I just want to thank everybody on this board, Tim, Dr. Whiteley, and all of you. I don't know how I would do it. You have a pandemic, you have political issues that are seeping in here, and you still have the strength. So I want you to know that I appreciate everything you do. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I have a very short statement. Others before me have done a great job conveying their feelings about the issues of the day. My name is Scott Sparrow. I live at 75 Oliver Road. I've got 4 kids. 2 have already come through the schools, and 2 that are continuing their high school career now. When Amy and I moved into Wyoming back in '95, over 25 years ago, we believed in the schools, even though we didn't have kids. And we believe in the schools now, and the leadership at this body and the administration is shepherding our kids through both challenges of health, challenges of scholastic preparation, and challenges of social preparation. So my statement really is in support. We really appreciate the decision-making, the collaboration of experts and members of the community in devising our approach to the COVID pandemic, as well as in approach to our issues around social understandings. So we really appreciate the past years, as well as how you're approaching this current year and how it evolves as the science changes, as the pandemic progresses and recedes. We appreciate and understand that things are going to need adjustment, and we hope that you remain open to that. We're very thankful that our kids can have face-to-face teaching, even though masks are required. It's a great compromise from our perspective. We think face-to-face is just so much a better approach for everybody, and we appreciate the fact that you're taking a strong stance to make safety an important balance point. We also have confidence in the scholastic rigor of the program here at Wyoming. We feel that our daughters were prepared for college and getting prepared for life in a diverse world, and we fully expect our boys to be likewise prepared. So thank you very much. We appreciate what you're doing, and we appreciate the continued support and leadership.
All right, thank you. That completes our recognition of the public. I appreciate all of your comments, and we do that every month at our regular meeting. We have 2 very special presentations for everyone tonight, because we are looking, we're finally getting the pandemic to not take over every part of our lives, and we're actually looking at student growth, which we're very excited to present tonight. So I'm about to turn it over to Tim for the 2 presentations. We began this conversation before Tim was even on board. This board knew we had a direction we had to go in. We have brought him on board because one of the things he does best is data evaluation, and with that strong purpose of student growth. And so with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to you, because this is what you do well.
Okay, all right, great, thank you, Jeannie. And we can start to make our way up, but before we turn it over, we're going to start with our primary schools and presenting some really important information. You know, we've talked a lot about goals, and what you'll see here is a great example at our primary schools and our middle school about how these goals turn into actions, specifically around our goal having to do with teaching and learning. And so when we talk about teaching and learning, we talk about creating great opportunities for students that personalize instruction. And we're at a critical point where we need to be intentional and purposeful in terms of meeting students where they are and helping them to move forward. You spoke a little bit about those conversations as I was coming in the summer of 2019, where we recognized we did have students that we thought looked like we had trends where students weren't growing to the capacity that we thought they potentially could grow. And then you throw a pandemic on top of that. As we look at the fall data that we're looking at right now, our internal data, as we look at report card data that we've gotten back from over the past 20 months, it's clear that there are gaps in student learning. And so this need to focus on data, again, to be intentional, to be purposeful, to identify what students know and what their next steps are is really, really important. That's important for a primary school student, for a middle school student, and for a high school student. And so that's what we've got here today. We've got some examples of what that looks like. This is just one example of how this works at the primary school and at the middle school. But it gives you, again, a good view on how a goal turns into an action. So at this time, I'll turn it over to our very new, brand new primary school's principal, Mrs. Gina Kirschner.
So much. I'm really excited to have two of our primary teachers here with me. We have Tracy Kroger, who is a reading specialist at Elm, as well as Jen Kreimer, who is a third grade teacher at Elm. We have 3 buildings and 33 classrooms across the primary, and this is really something that's being replicated across all of those. So this is just going to hopefully give you a sample of how this is being brought to life for one team. And for one particular student at our primary. So really what we've been doing is some things that are the same, and then we've also made some tweaks to really kind of hone our process and make sure that we have really intentional data that allows us to come up with the best solution for our students. So what we've been doing for many years is benchmark screening assessments for every student. And we do that 3 times a year in the fall, the winter, and the spring. In kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, well, actually, let me back up and say, in K4, we've been giving MAP. And the MAP assessment is, it's important to note that that's being read aloud to our students in kindergarten and 1st grade. So it really measures their listening comprehension, how well they understand something read aloud to them. So in response to that, one of the things we did this year is for our kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade students, we added a layer of benchmark assessment called Ames Webb. Ames Webb Plus is an assessment tool that allows us to really dig deeper and find out what their word attack skills are. So we're not only assessing how well they understand what they hear, but also how well can they actually read the words on the page. Okay, so that was one addition that we made. And one of the things that happens is once we get that benchmark data, we use that as a way to kind of flag kids and say, ooh, we have something that we need to look a little more deeply at. And the next portion of that is something that we added in this year, which were some really great diagnostic assessments to help us really pinpoint not only, okay, yes, this child is struggling as a reader, but what about the reader do we need to intervene on? Right, to really get down to that root cause of a student's difficulty. And we know that can be a lot of different facets. It could be phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, comprehension. But rather than just taking a guess, we've done some diagnostic work to really find out what is the problem so that we can address that. And then that ultimately leads to a really targeted intervention that is efficient and makes good use of our time and good use of our teachers' time. So this is just a little snapshot just to give you the kind of idea of what we did. So based on that benchmark assessment, we took a look at our kids that were flagged in some way. And we did some deeper dive into why were they struggling, right? And you're going to see some fall percentiles there that are kind of all over the map. We have some higher ones, and we have some really, really low ones. And what we always do from there is take a look at, okay, what is going on for this student that is making them score this way or perform however they're performing in the classroom? So you'll see there that there's 3 different columns. One for an assessment called the Tower 2, which just really measures their ability to read sight words efficiently, as well as to do some phonetic decoding. You'll see one that's the PAST, which is the Phonological Awareness Screening Test that helps us really pinpoint how well they're able to hear and manipulate sounds and words. And then finally, the Core Phonics Survey, which really begins looking at just letter names and letter sounds, to reading Cvc words like cat and dog, all the way up to reading multisyllabic words kind of in this sequential order to find out where they begin to break down. So we got a lot of really great information about all of our students across the 3 primaries that were flagged by those benchmarks. And ultimately, that helped us to decide, what do we do for these kids? Rather than just throwing everything at them, how do we really take a step back and find out what's the just right intervention that's going to move them forward? And so we really started thinking a lot about how do we respond to the data. And it can be tempting, especially in 3rd and 4th grade, to jump right to comprehension, because ultimately what we want are kids understanding complex text, right? But what we also know is that, like you see up there in that top corner, there's a lot of components that go into a skilled reader, right? And we know that comprehension is the ultimate end goal that we want, but we know that if we have some of those word recognition pieces missing, it's going to be really hard to get to comprehension if they can't read the words on the page fluently and effortlessly. So we really took a step back and have been doing some work about phonological awareness and how do we get those building blocks of hearing the sounds and manipulating them in words, and then how do we actually get them to be able to decode and encode those words properly, and all of that leads to comprehension. And so Jen and Tracy are going to share with you an example of how we brought this to life for one particular student, so you can see how we're already seeing some pretty big growth.
So this is the data profile of a 3rd grade student who has been receiving reading interventions since 1st grade. The data profile in 1st grade indicated the need for a very broad, comprehensive reading intervention, including decoding, comprehension strategies, and fluency. 2nd grade data last year reflected the same need, as Ames Webb Plus at the 2nd grade level does not assess decoding or phonemic awareness. This year, the data for this student revealed a critical need in the areas of phonemic awareness and decoding.
When this particular student was given the Tower 2 score, the score was found to be in the 18th percentile, and this student was then given the Phonological Awareness Screening Test, or that PASS test, as well as the Core Phonics Survey. And as you can see on the PASS test, the student hears and manipulates sounds at the basic level, much like that of a student in the middle of kindergarten. The student's Core Phonics Survey results also indicated that the student was not yet able to decode basic Cvc words at 80% mastery or higher, much like that of an early 1st grader. And because of these results, it was clear that the student needed direct, explicit, and systematic instruction in both phonics as well as phonemic awareness.
After collaboration between Gina, Jen, and the rest of the team, this student's Tier 2 intervention in the reading room was aligned in order to meet these needs, and a Tier 1 intervention in the regular classroom was determined. Gina has purchased the Haggerty Phonemic Awareness Program for Reading Specialists to pilot this year, so the student was assessed with the Bridge the Gap curriculum intended for 2nd through 4th graders. Based on this assessment, the student was not yet ready for these activities. The student began Haggerty activities in the primary curriculum instead. After a month, the student was reassessed and was ready to begin 2nd grade activities through Bridge the Gap. On the screen is an example of where this student started with phonemic awareness. The entire Haggerty program uses hand motions to represent sounds and words. For example, a student would say cloudy, and then he would say cloudy without E. What's left is cloud. The student has made great progress in hearing sounds and manipulating sounds because of these hand visuals. In addition, as part of his Tier 2 intervention, this student receives explicit, systematic instruction in the decoding and encoding of phonemes as well as Cvc words. Each day, the students practices auditory drills with phonemes, visual drills with phonemes, and encoding drills with phonemes. The student segments phonemes like w, I, n, blends them together to say win, and then writes words with Cvc patterns when given orally. As this student progresses to Cvc Words with Digraphs, This student is learning to recognize the number of phonemes in a word versus the number of letters. For example, chin has 3 phonemes but 4 letters. This becomes a critical skill in the orthographic mapping of words.
So Tracy and I looked at the data that we collected to try to figure out what I could do that could mirror what she was doing in the general classroom. So in addition to the core curriculum and guided reading groups, I do a 1-minute phonemic awareness intervention, and for this student, it's working on deleting syllables. So I would say tiger, but now say tiger, but don't say tie. I also do a 5 to 10 minute core phonics instruction, and again, for this student, it's on short vowels, and this includes a summary of the information that we've previously learned, visuals where I give the letter or letters, and then the student gives me the sound that goes with it, auditory where I would give the sound and the student writes the letter or the letter for that sound, and then a blending drill where the student blends the sounds to form nonsense words. So then I would then present the new information, which includes presenting a new sound, reading Cvc words, and writing Cvc words with that new sound. I do this 3 to 4 times a week, and I collect progress monitoring data bi-weekly. And then Tracy and I both record the number of touch points we have with the students and the progress monitoring data.
Every student in the primary at every building who has a Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3 intervention has a progress monitoring sheet that looks very similar to this. The entire team has access to this data in order to monitor the effectiveness of any student's instruction. As you can see, both Tier 1 and Tier 2 interventions for this student are aligned with the assessment data, which indicated a deficit in phonemic awareness and phonics.
And as you can see from the progress monitoring chart, the student is making progress in both phonemic awareness activities, which is at 80% or higher, as well as decoding the Cvc words at 80% and higher in both of the tiers of intervention.
And so, again, this is something very similar to what's happening across all 3 of our primaries and with all of our struggling readers, really as a point of making sure that we are catching our readers and giving them exactly what they need in real time. So these data charts like this one, the whole entire team can see these. We're monitoring this and having conversations. We don't have to wait all the way until January to make a change to an intervention or to switch up what we're doing for our students. We can do it right in the moment when it makes sense for that child to make sure that every child is making the growth that they need and deserve to become those confident, capable readers.
If you had questions. Do you want to ask any questions, or?
Sure, I have a question.
Go ahead.
I always have a question.
Go ahead.
Mrs. Kirschner, wait, don't go. Just go backwards for, this is going to be silly, but go backwards for a minute, please, and just review what is Tier 1, what is Tier 2, what is Tier 3, and then, if you would, the role that each one of the teachers plays.
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. So when we think about a multi-tiered system of supports, we think of like a pyramid, right? So you have Tier 1 is what we do for all students, and that's the bottom of the pyramid. Then we layer on, therefore multi-tiered systems of supports, a Tier 2, and Tier 2 would be what we do for some students. And that would be like what Tracy Kroger does in the reading resource room for pull-out intervention. Tier 3 would be what we do for very few students, and that is a highly specialized intervention, often one-on-one or in really intense in terms of the amount of times or the amount of touch points that we have with that student. Sometimes those are students that go on to get an IEP or have special education services, but not always. So when we think about our multi-tiered systems of supports, we think about always making sure that that Tier 1 is solidly in place, and then anything that we do that's a pull-out intervention is complementary or on top of that. So that's why we know it's really important for our classroom teachers like Jen to have a really solid Tier 1 plan in place, but then also a Tier 1 intervention, so that what's happening when they're pulled out to the reading room, in Tracy's case, is in addition to, it's like we call it double dipping, right? We double dip those kids to make sure that they get something in addition to that initial support.
And children can move in and out.
Yes.
Maybe not the third tier as much. That's
Yes, absolutely. And so, and really the goal is for our students to get back to tier one, to get back to a place where what we're doing for them in tier one instruction is all that they need. And it doesn't mean that we don't do special things for them or tweak things and modify for kids in tier one. It just means that what we're able to provide for them doesn't have to be taking place in another setting or in another more specialized way.
all right. Thank you.
I had a question too. Would you say that this approach is one that works, is the approach we take always, but also could specifically be leveraged in places where either pandemic related or otherwise, some student may have fallen behind relative to their progression?
Right. I would say that yes, this is really best practice in terms of how we intervene for students. And I mean, I think Wyoming is a bit of an anomaly. We have kids that tend to perform pretty well, but I think the pandemic is kind of showing some skill deficits that are maybe more pronounced than we've seen in the past. But if we look nationally at like NAEP scores, for example, for our fourth graders across the country, we have a crisis in our country in terms of literacy. And we have a very small number of children becoming proficient readers by the fourth grade. And so these sorts of assessments and diagnostic tools are really based on the science and the research that's going into how do we pull ourselves out of that as a nation. And so a lot of this comes from that large body of work that's being done in the service of helping grow all of our kids into confident, capable readers.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. I think.
I just had a quick question. How do we, first of all, I love the rope analogy. I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah.
How do we engage parents to let them know that these interventions are happening? Because there's not fully IEP, like you said, but these are excellent interventions that be great for parents to kind of know how their kids are being supported.
Absolutely. I think those are really great questions. So one thing I've been doing is we've been putting these into our weekly newsletters to families. So everybody that gets the primary newsletter has seen the reading rope. They have seen all of these sorts of things, just trying to give people little tidbits of information that help them really see what a monumental task it is that our children take on to become strategic readers. It's really, there's a saying that like teaching reading really is rocket science. And it's because reading is not something that we're hardwired to do. It is truly something that our brains haven't adapted to. It's really pretty recent in the history of humankind and something that is a very specialized task. And so putting some of that information out there. But also in the primary, we're going to do a family literacy night in February, where we're going to actually be doing some things with families, inviting them in and showing them some strategies that they can take home and try with their students, just to make reading enjoyable, but also slip in some of these things. Because if you do it just right, the kids actually think it's fun. And that's always the catch, is to try to make it not feel like such a difficult task.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
All right, thank you.
All right, thanks.
I'll just speak to the great collaboration that happens, as you can see, with the classroom teacher, the administrator, and the specialist to all be on the same page with supporting students and looking at all students. Powerful, powerful stuff. All right, and so now we're excited about our middle school and a new tool.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting us here tonight. I'm here with one of our fifth grade teachers. Ms. Lori Miller is going to be presenting with me. And so coming out of the pandemic, we did know that some of our curriculum was not able to be fully taught, that we had some gaps and some holes in just the basic curriculum and where we needed to go. So the state of Ohio developed a new assessment this year. And we are one of the first districts that is administering this test. It is the Restart Readiness Assessment that we're given to our students in reading, math, and science. Science, it's only happening in grades 5 and 8. So what is this Restart Readiness Assessment developed out of Ohio? It's basically an assessment tool that is made for, grades 3 through high school, but we are using it only currently in the middle school. And it is composed of 2 tests, a benchmark assessment, which our students are currently in the process of taking, and then there are checkpoint assessments that will be given to the students after we have taught the curriculum and see if we are on course. These assessments were really developed to really make action, something that we could do immediately and didn't have to wait for results until the following spring or fall. And so when our students are administered these assessments, our teachers are able to get the data immediately, roughly within 24 hours. So it's very actionable data, and that is what our teachers need. They need things that are actionable and in their hands. Lori Miller is going to share now with you some of the results of the assessments that were given in science for 5th grade from the teacher perspective and how she's able to go ahead and use this within the classroom.
All right, so I went to Jennifer and said, hey, let me try something new since I'm new to middle school. And she said, okay. So this is what it looks like. So we use the 5th graders as our own little guinea pigs because they tend to be more flexible than the 8th graders. And they did an awesome job. And so this is kind of a snapshot of what you get back. So we're able to see each domain in whatever test it is. So in reading, you would see writing and nonfiction and fiction. But in science, you see the 3 main branches of science. Then you also see this little plus symbol, which you can open up, and it tells you the 5 items the students did the best on and the 5 items they did the worst. Now, I love data, I really do. I don't think there's many people in this room that wouldn't agree with that, but I only like when it's something I can use it. I want to be able to inform my instruction for the benefit of teaching. And a lot of times what happens is you get your results from the year before in the summer when you're at home, and those kids aren't yours anymore. In fact, I've been in 4th grade for 17 years, so a lot of times those kids weren't even in my building anymore by the time I was getting the data back on them. And to me, that always felt like too late. I want it sooner than that so that I can intervene. So here's some of the data we got back. So you get an OST score, which predicts how they will perform on the actual OST. They'll take a second post-instruction benchmark test 3 weeks before the actual OST, which will then allow us time to review any holes we see. There's also checkpoints, which allow us to assess each of those little tiny domains separately to make sure throughout the year we stay on track. So how adorable are my kids, by the way? Well, our kids. So one of the things we can see as our strengths, not surprisingly, thanks to the strong primary, our kids tend to be really strong readers. They have a ton of background knowledge. It's nice to be able to see the kinds of questions we did well in. We can actually click now and open it up, and it says, here's the kind of question that they totally rocked, right? And so for me as a teacher, what I'm able to do then is say, well, I don't need to spend a ton of time there, and maybe my curriculum map needs to be adjusted because we are so awesome in life science. And it's really strong. So they're coming to 5th grade with a lot of life science knowledge. Now I know I can pull back there, and I can put my energy where it needs to be. It also shows us the 5 weaknesses. So as soon as I opened up the 5 weaknesses, and believe me, I was like counting down the minutes till I got my data. I opened each of them in a little tab next to each other, and I was like, oh my. Every single one of them required them to take information from a graph or a table or a diagram and apply their science knowledge in order to answer the question. So that was a trend right away. And with that information, I was then able to, I had an assessment coming up 2 days later. I went back to that assessment. I added more questions that had these things in it so that right away, I'm making sure that we're continuously applying what we've just learned, which is that we need more work on reading those graphs and tables and charts and diagrams and food chains and food webs. So this is really a helpful piece of information. Now, not only do I want to stop, not only do I look at my curriculum, but then I sit down with the 5th grade team and I say, hey, on that social studies test you have next week, let's stick some more charts and graphs and tables on that because we need some more practice. The other thing it tells you is a completion rate, which you would never, ever get to see when you actually administer the OST. You have an idea of how long a student took on the whole test. But this gives you a picture of the pacing. So we were able to identify students who, a couple of them went too fast. And the little thing comes up and says, like, they couldn't have actually even read the test that quick. And so you know, well, we got something to talk about there. And it also shows you kids who are gonna struggle to finish the test. So now we can intervene and figure out why is it. Interestingly enough, most of the kids who struggled to complete the pre-instruction assessment in the amount of time, they were not kids that are not proficient in science or not strong readers. They tend to be kids who are really, really bright, gifted kids who sit there and like analyze the question and think deeply about it. And they're like, hey, I have another question. What about, do they mean the hawk or do you think they mean the... So those kinds of things are all teachable skills, right? We need to show them how to take a test like that, what to focus on and what not to focus on. We also get a item analysis, which shows us, the items the kids struggled with, how those questions were worded. We can then pull our own assessments and look at if we're using the same kind of wording. A lot of times, even a simple like vocabulary usage kind of thing can confuse kids on a test. And then we can also see any kind of trends. Over time, the more we use this, we'll be able to see more of those kinds of trends. But just knowing right off the bat that we need tables, graphs, charts, diagrams help informs our instruction. It allows us to make changes, right away. It also allows us to take the data and break it down by gender and race so that we can compare how kids are doing and then offer the correct intervention. Another thing I noticed is I pulled up the data and I put it next to our ELA map data and looked at the reading scores to see if there was a correlation. One of the things that the kids could do is there is a read aloud option on the math and the science state test. So anybody can put in headphones and have the state test read to them. However, very few students choose to do that. The benefit to that is that it not only reads it to them so they can hear the words that they might be unfamiliar with, but it also helps pace them. So one really good, easy fix is to say to those kids who took the test really fast or not in the right amount of time, hey, why don't you use the read aloud option? That'll kind of help you pace the test out so that you don't end up, not finishing or finishing so quick you have time just to twiddle your thumbs. And then it also shows our comparison to state, district, school, teacher data, which is also really helpful. In the past, you would see down to school data, you would see how the school did, but you didn't always have the ability to break down into teacher data. So now if we have one person who's really strong in life science and somebody else who's strong in physical science, those people can pair up and say, well, what are you doing to teach that? Share that with me. And then this is probably one of my biggest takeaways. So Earth and space science was overall for the 5th graders was much lower than the other areas of science. So I pulled out the vertical alignment for the state because I was like, it just doesn't make sense. It's so different. And my current 5th graders at the end of 3rd grade would have been sitting on the couch in their pajamas because of the pandemic. And they missed some things. And as it turns out, they missed an entire unit on Earth and space science. And so I went back to, when would they have had that before the pandemic then? Because that's going to be their base of knowledge that I'm working from. And that was kindergarten. So to have 10 and 11-year-olds who haven't seen space science since kindergarten allows me to know that now I need to adjust my curriculum map, because this is going to take us a little bit more time than I had originally anticipated. So some of the things that I was able to do with the data so far was one, reorder, restructure the curriculum map, move around some things, change the amount of time I was going to use on certain things, as well as adding in some more layers of building that background knowledge. Even asking the kids, at the beginning of the unit, a lot of times you'll say, what do you know? What do you want to learn? And the kids were like, we don't know anything about space, but we know about astronauts. So there's just a lot to build there. I also was able to make new groupings for students, like their lab partners, rearranged seats in the classroom the next day, started a morning intervention science support session, which somebody should stop by. It's really fun. 7:30 to 8 o'clock, Wednesday mornings. We are all in there, just, parents are super supportive. Every week I have like bagels, donuts, somebody brings me coffee. It's great. And we've had as many kids as like 50 kids, and I'm like, we're busting at the seams with kids who are, and parents who are willing to bring them early and send them with their breakfast and do all of that. So that's super, super nice. I've shared the information with my 5th grade level team. The ELA department gave their benchmark, and then we started to compare the science data with the ELA data, so that's where we're at right now. Math actually is giving theirs today and tomorrow, and so we'll be able to look at all 3 across the line and see what kind of trends we have. And then I also, at my science department meeting, talked to the team. We pulled out the vertical alignments, and everybody went back through and said, okay, think about where your kids were when we were shut down for the pandemic, go back, figure out what content they missed. For some subjects, that's going to be a different process. A subject where, like math, where you have to have all of those pieces moving up. But science is kind of taught in these chunks. So we have to kind of go back and find out what that chunk was and pick it up as we move forward. The other thing we noticed when giving this is that the kids haven't taken as many assessments as they have in the past. Typically, our kids are really good test takers in general. But there was a ton of questions. And I have to say, there's nothing more painful than administering a test in the spring and watching a student get a question wrong because they don't know how to use the technology. And you can't help them because you're not allowed to legally. And they'll be like, but I just don't understand how to make the connect bar delete. And you're like, I'm sorry, you're doing a great job, honey. But this time, you're able to intervene right there. They can ask you that question. You can answer that question. You can say, oh, let me show you. And then you can take that information. You can put it in your lesson plan for the next week so that you hit it again. And then you can go next door and ask the math teacher to hit it again, right? So that's some of the really amazing pieces of information we were able to gather. What do we need to focus on? What do we not need to focus on? And also the ability to kind of look at where's the curriculum going to overlap enough that we're going to be able to kind of find that perfect place where, for example, using evidence to support an idea. That kind of overlaps all the subject areas. So if we're all teaching it and they're seeing it in multiple bells a day, you kind of get more bang for your buck. And so that is us on the playground the other day. We were trying to show rotation and revolution at the same time.
Jupiter way out here. 51.
I will say Mr. Weber did attend, and he did a pretty good job. I think he had the Earth at one point, but that's a tricky position because then you've got the rotation and the revolution. But that was really born out of the idea that we were needing some background knowledge. And you could see as I was teaching it, you could feel how much of a struggle it was to really grasp those two ideas at the same time.
So thank you, Lori. And I really need to thank all the teachers at the middle school for taking these assessments on. This is a new assessment, so there's a lot of risk involved in that we're not sure how it's all going to come out in the wash, what's it going to look like, but the feedback that we've received has been very positive. And in terms of next steps, our teams are going to be talking and sharing this data. And so it's very important that the music teachers, the art teachers, understand where their students are in language arts and in math, and how can we all come together to support our students in their growth. And so what's very valuable here is that it is actionable, and Lori immediately changed her instruction from these assessments.
Any questions?
I had a question, but I didn't want to go first.
No, go ahead, go first. Wait, we'll have questions.
Come on down.
Of course. Of course. Go ahead.
Maybe it's for Jennifer. I know there's some reaction kind of in the district relative to some of the data coming in, and there's like, oh my God, I told you we were going to fall behind with the pandemic if we did hybrid or what have you. This intervention that you described, the morning intervention support sessions, specifically for this area, feels like an actionable and specific approach that does help address gaps or where students have either fallen behind or just want to have better preparation. Is that something that's already being implemented across all the other subjects or the other areas at the grade levels in a way that works, or is that still being discussed?
It's a great question. I'm currently in the process of working with Dr. Whiteley on some of these actionable interventions. Currently, what we have is only in place for science in the 5th grade. Sorry, I keep getting fogged up. Is currently in place at the 5th grade. We do currently offer intervention classes at the middle school. We have Literacy for Life. We have also our math lab. But we're taking this data and making it more actionable in timely reaction to the data that we're receiving. So we do anticipate improving those programs a bit with the support of Dr. Whiteley.
Yeah. Well, I have a love for data as well, not quite to the data nerd level, but I love that it's timely in a space where you can use it, but also at the teacher level, because inherently there's a little bit of accountability, relative to how it's coming through, but also perspective on how we can shift or adjust the curriculum maps and other things to adjust the spaces where students really need it. So I realize what you mentioned on the risk of it, showing something that doesn't look good already or doesn't look the way it normally does, kind of in our district, but I appreciate you taking that on courageously and looking at it so that we can actually be better.
Well, what I have to say is that this has been some of the most exciting work that I've had to experience at the middle school. The amount of excitement behind the data from the staff is very exciting. People are looking at it immediately. I know that the people were looking it out. They gave the ELA assessment last week. I know teachers were looking at the data over the weekend. It is that timely. And so immediately, I anticipate by the end of this week, we'll be able to really get some plans in place so that, Tim and Ashley and myself can meet with different people and support them in interventions with our students. So it's very exciting, and it feels like we have a nice momentum running. We talked today to the students at each grade levels. Hopefully, if you get a chance to talk to your middle school student, they'll share this with you. They don't often share in middle school. You kind of got to prod them a little bit to get the information. But one of the things that we talk to our students about is really looking at assessments. We have a lot of anxiety amongst some of our students with kind of coming back and experiencing school again, that we talked about assessments being a way of showing what you know. Don't look at them as something that is, I have to get an A. No, show what you know. This is your moment in time. And we want our students to really understand that this assessment is often for us as the adult, not so much for them. But we want to know, what do you know, so that we can lift you up where you need to be lifted up and move you forward. So,
absolutely.
Yes.
Well, you just answered my question. I was going to ask you to address a little bit, sometimes when parents hear assessments and preparing for a test, it can feel like, oh, that's what we're going to just now be teaching to a test. And what I love that I'm hearing, and even in the video clip that I see with the hands-on learning, that a lot of it is focused on improving instruction for children individually. And I think that's great, but you did address the idea of, and knowing that kids feel, there's a point where we can do too many assessments, too much testing, but I think what you're describing seems like something that helps a teacher in real time help a child better.
It's about growth, really. It is about achieving and finding out. It's kind of like those individual sports. My kids were swimmers. And swimmers, anybody in swimming knows it's about your time. It's not about the person next to you. And that's what we need to look at these assessments as. It is their personal experience and it's their personal growth. And we just want, every day, we talk to our kids about getting 1% better every day. Ask your middle school students about that too. They like to joke about that. But we're dead serious about that. 1% better every day is our expectation for them. And when we achieve that together, we're unstoppable. And so it's a very exciting time. Our teachers are working hard. Our students are working hard. I could not be any prouder of the middle school and the growth that we're going forward with. So thank you. Thank you for your support.
I just have a quick one.
Yes.
It's just, is that on? It's just a quick thank you as well for both of you all to do that. We've talked so much, like we were saying, about the growth and the gaps, so to have the actionable steps is wonderful. And getting to hear you speak before, Lori, I love just when you're talking about all the teachers overlapping. And I think you would use the example of even going to the art teacher to work on something for symmetry, because that was something that looked like kids were struggling with. And that was helpful for me to hear too. And so it was a thank you for doing that, and being able to use that real-time data is helpful to hear. So I don't know if that's something you want to share.
The more we can work together and team up and ask the ELA teachers to pull articles about space and work together, the better it is really for our kids. So
thank you.
Can
Thanks
I
both
just say
groups,
one
yeah.
thing about that? Like, one thing I think that in a primary situation, you're very, you're self-contained. And so if I'm the language arts teacher and the science teacher, of course I'm going to read the science material and teach language arts skills at the same time. When you come to the middle school, we're departmentalized.
Right.
And so we're trying to do a shift in our thinking a bit, because these are all of our kids, and we all are really, in a sense, reading teachers, right? We're exposing our kids to all different types of reading. And so anytime an art teacher can, talk about something with science, or a social studies teacher can put something in with graphs, is beneficial to the student as a whole. And so that's one of the things that is new for some of our teachers to start thinking about. And so, again, we're all growing. We're all 1% better each day, and that's something that we're continuing to grow in. So,
Well, thank you both.
Thank you.
thank you.
And I'll just expand on it a little bit. Love the conversation. Thank you. Thank you to our primary and our middle school teams who were here. And honestly, those conversations are happening throughout the buildings. And just today, I was going back and forth with some language arts teachers at the middle school about the work that they're doing, which is phenomenal. Great conversations. And the conversations, as we're talking with kids, are shifting. And they're shifting to, this is a tool that helps me be a better teacher for you. And that is, it takes the risk out of it. We heard messages of belonging, and how do we develop this great climate and culture in our classrooms? That's a part of belonging. And how do we make kids feel comfortable? And how do we make them know that the real purpose here is for them to grow? And we're trying to help them. So really powerful conversations. And to show you kind of how that's packed together in teaching and learning, we talk about three things. We talk about curriculum, and are we aligned in what we're supposed to teach? And we're building curriculum maps. So there's great conversations happening across teams. We talk about assessment, and how can we make sure that we assess in a way that helps us understand where students are and what their next steps for growth are. That's what you saw a little bit of here tonight. That's just one sliver of the work that's happening. And then we talk about instructional strategies. We've talked about Mike Rutherford before, and how do we share and have conversations about the instructional strategies that actually help support students the most. So all of that works together, but understanding that that's one piece of the work that is happening in all of our classrooms. It is, I don't know who said it, it is rocket science being a teacher. Because then we have goals for belonging, and how do we make kids fall in love with school while we're doing all of this work? And how do we communicate? This came up tonight too. How do we communicate and connect with families so that they know what's happening and how to support their students as they make their way to school or as they're working at home. So just couldn't be more excited about the real work that's going on to do the best job we can for students right now. So really appreciate those teams for being here and to dig into the work a little bit and to show us how those goals become actions. At our November meeting, we will have a high school team who will be here. They're going to talk a little bit about the Dan Jones Center for Research and Innovation. And they're going to be talking about how teachers collaborate. Classroom teachers collaborate with our media specialists and also with our innovation specialists to embed STREAM, science, technology, research, engineering, the arts, and mathematics into instruction. And we are blessed to have the Research and Innovation Center, so we'll give a snapshot of what that looks like, just a small little piece of that. I guess in closing, for just this very first part of the meeting.
That's all right, then it'll move.
We've talked about being excited about being able to get back to the goals, to be better each and every day. And I'm excited to have staff members, teachers and administrators and support staff in our buildings that are really dedicated to that work. The past 20 months has been difficult. It's been difficult for students, teachers, families, and for school districts to focus on the work. And so I'm excited about what happens here tonight. I'm excited about, as we move forward, really putting all of our energy and our time into the things that you see happening right here.
I had one question and one comment. I know we referenced the discussion that the middle school is having with Dr. Whiteley relative to reapplying what's happening with science across other grade levels. When the high school comes back, is it possible for us to just understand next month the update on where we are with some of that reapplication, just to see how broadly and how quickly we can get that happening? That would be great. One comment I wanted to make, I remember years ago I was walking off the track and I'd been running and I saw the sign that says, "Did you get better today?" And I realized it was there at the field because I guess teams, when they're practicing or whatever, the whole point is getting better. I wanted to acknowledge the folks who've been working in this, because what I heard today was a bit of a growth mindset approach to, am I getting better? Am I learning? Versus, did I get it perfect? And we've been having this conversation since 2018, trying to understand what the top ratings and those kinds of things were really built upon. And was it something that was solid and sustainable or not? And the conversations we're in today, I think, are the best looks at data, the best engagement of that data that I've heard, in the times that we've been working. And I won't credit all that to you, Tim, because others have already sung your praises. But I do think it's an example of progress and an example of looking at the gaps that we see and understanding what we don't already know. It's ironic that I feel like this is also an example of how taking an honest look at what are historical and actual truths, without a fear that it will make us feel bad, allows us and actually equips us to change and to do the work to help our students get better and focus on helping them become the people that are prepared academically in all of these spaces. And so I wanted to say to you, but also the others, that I appreciate your not being afraid to look at these truths for fear that it would harm our psyche in some way. Because we could continue boastfully talking about how great we are without dealing with these truths, but it wouldn't actually help us be better by dealing with what's current right now in support of that future. So I just wanted to thank you for the approach, but also for empowering the leaders under you to look at this with an expectation that we are going to be better 6 months from now, and we are going to be better a year from now, but also equipping them to take those steps to really make that progress. I, with the 10th grader and the 7th grader, am excited about what we're seeing and what I think it enables for our future. So thank you for that.
Good work.
Tim, I'd like to add one thing to what Ilya said so beautifully, and that's the example, and as you mentioned, one sliver of what's happening in your leadership and what you've been able to do during a pandemic. How everybody here, and just listening to the comments of so many people that spoke in support, we know, as your board, and many of us in the room know, you return phone calls. There has been a lot of angst in the community, a lot of division. People will send you an angry email. You call them personally. You have not stopped connecting with people, giving your time, and I hope going forward as we see these presentations and moving forward, that our community will come together, we'll come together as a board to support you because you're a fantastic educational leader.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
I can't not say something there, but I will say, people are working really hard throughout the entire district. And in my mind, everyone's wanted this great focus that we're getting to right now. It's just about alignment, and so it's been the work to align people to be moving in the same direction, to be focused on the same things, to be making sure that we all have that vision. So I feel like the vision is there, and the passion is there to do great things for kids. So I'm excited about moving forward.
Terrific. Thank you. We're going to go into the business part of this now, the board committee reports, and actually this will go a little bit faster because finance didn't have a chance to meet tonight.
We did not. We are scheduled to meet next week.
All right. Citizens Advisory did meet once just to get started. You want to bring us up to date on that?
We met virtually on October the 5th, and then the groups, is it not working? Oh, now can you hear it?
Now you're
I am
you're working.
on. Can you hear that? Okay. We met virtually on October the 5th, and then each group was able to break apart in their separate groups for their studies. So the work is getting started, and they're able to discuss the strategies to carry out their research for each topic.
All right, thank you. Three groups of community members and administrators and board members all working on 3 different subjects.
Focus on primary facilities, one study bullying, another study, and standards-based grading practices at the primary levels, a third study.
All right, Business Advisory did not meet. I'm now on Superintendent Committee, sorry. The Belonging Committee.
Okay, I'll speak to that if I can. Kara, if that's okay. So we did have a belonging and inclusion collaborative meeting. That was on October 12th, and what we did is, if you remember, we split up into teams, much like the Citizens Advisory Committee has done, to make sure that we're continuing with the work. And so we have 3 teams that are now meeting separately, working on their studies. One is on curriculum resources, one is on examining our discipline data, and one is on communication strategies. And we did modify the name of that committee to Belonging Committee because we thought it was more reflective and inclusive of the work that's actually being done across the nature of our great diverse community.
Thank you. Community engagement, is there anyone who would like to?
I would say our big thing was we worked concessions together as a board office and leadership, so we got to see a lot of people, but it was senior night, so that was a big one. And then I was thinking about that too, where like there were a lot of community engagement, but more of it as a parent. Experienced as not a board member, but like WSMA did Porch Fest, which is amazing and a wonderful thing to walk the street and hear the music of the students. So.
Right.
WCIA did the Poetry Slam. That was very good.
Right.
And then Gene, I think you spoke a little bit about the October 20th. We had our first parent partnership series event, and that was with Dr. Jonathan Dalton, speaking about angst and worry. Great event.
None of us have any
No.
angst or worry right
No,
now.
no. And actually, that was part of the program. Is it's a normal part of a person's experience, but it's when it prevents us from functioning as when it really becomes a big concern. But our goal in a parent partnership program is to have an expert on a topic and then allow families to break off into groups to talk about the ways that they are working through some of the issues that students face. We know we have these incredible resources in our district, our families, and so we want to make sure that we're tapping into those resources and having those folks share strategies. So this is the parent partnership series is something that we're looking to continue with at least 2 to 3 events a year, talking about those biggest concerns that families have for their students.
And the first community conversation will take place before our next meeting, so
November
that's
18th.
certainly coming up. There's another thing coming up. The high school is doing the Diary of Anne Frank. I noticed when I turned around to look at the the screen there. Their sets are all up there. They obviously are on their way.
Yep.
So that will happen before. I also received a letter from Karen Reiber, which I'm going to pass around to the board members. I particularly like that this is on stationery from Avon Lake, Ohio, because as I look around the room, there are a couple people from Northern Ohio who found their way down here. Smart move. But Karen thanks us for she thanks the teachers, she thanks the community for all the support she's had throughout both her career at the middle school and the high school. So I'll pass it around to everybody. All right, thank you. Let's, facility committee.
So I'm on that one too. Okay, well, I would say, well, we did not have a meeting, but the two biggest things were the new track getting laid so that it looks beautiful, that the lanes would get there, that it's blue and it's wonderful, and that also the new tennis courts. And if you did not get to see the video that was sent out about our wonderful superintendent and our new city manager getting to break in those tennis courts, it was really wonderful. But that's been years in the making as well, getting that, the funding and the timing of getting those tennis courts up and going. So those, I would say, is our biggest facilities, but do you all, am I missing something?
I think our next meeting is scheduled for next week. I just can't remember the date.
I can't either, actually. It's coming up.
A good cooperative use of money from both the schools and the city, but also just a good use of planning and thinking through what is best for both those groups. Planning and goal setting did not meet. Policy review will be meeting.
November 10th.
Yes, and we have plenty to read for that. And student achievement then.
Just a brief update here. We did meet on October 8th, and what we did, our Student Achievement Committee reviewed the data insights document from the Ohio Department of Education. And again, that showed the initial data that was provided about school district report card data across the state and what the most concerning negative impacts were from the pandemic. And so we reviewed that and reviewed strategies such as the ones you heard today, and in terms of how we're not only taking a hold of state assessment data, but the data that we have in the district that's actionable, which came up with both of our primary and middle school reports today.
So just to ask again, the Ohio data that we have now, we did not do a testing last year or 2 years ago. Last year we allowed, or the state allowed some people to opt out of the testing. So the data we're getting is, I mean, the reason they did not give grades or they did not give rankings, it's loose.
Right. So some of the messiness that I spoke about is participation rates, because when a student doesn't participate, it counts as a 0 for that district. And there are participation rates that are all over with different schools, different districts. Some of it is the learning mode that schools were in. As you look across the state, you had different learning modes, and some, like us, changed during the course of the year, so that obviously impacts the school districts in many different ways. So a lot of moving parts that were part of their initial message to say, because of those variables, we're not doing some of those things that we would typically do. The information is still available for school districts to plan from, which is exactly how we're utilizing that information. So it's, in my mind, what you heard tonight and what is happening across all classrooms is are the conversations about how do we use this information to help us know our curriculum, assess students in a way that's going to help me understand the uniqueness of each child better, and then utilize strategies that are best practice and most impactful for kids. And that's just what good teaching and learning looks like. And so our focus, our goal is to focus. We look at assessment, we absolutely do, but it's really to think about what are the needs that kids have in the classroom, what's good teaching and learning look like, and let's go there, and everything else will come.
All right, thank you. All right, in the Board of Education report, there's only one item, but this is, we need to actually approve the moving of the Kaya Grant Memorial entrance, and we talked about this last time, so now we need to do a formal vote. So if I may, please may I have a motion to accept the Board of Education report?
So moved.
You may have a second.
Second.
May I have a roll call?
Mr. Buckner?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mrs. G?
Yes.
Mrs. Zoller?
Yes.
Mrs. Broderick?
Yes. All right, thank you. Then the memorial entrance will be moved and be on another side of the Dan Jones Family Champion Center. All right, thank you. The treasurer's report.
Thanks, Jeannie. Item A, approval of the minutes from the regular meeting on September 27th and the planning meeting of October 12th. Item B, approve the statement of revenues and expenditures for month ending September 30th. Item C, the appropriation adjustments. Those were all student activity related, and then one for the foundation donation that is listed in item D. So item D there, accept with appreciation the 2 donations, and item E, approval of the report, please.
All right, thank you. May I have a motion to approve that report?
So moved.
May I have a second? Have a roll call, please.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mrs. G?
Yes.
Mrs. Zoller?
Yes.
Mrs. Broderick?
Yes.
Mr. Buckner?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, superintendent's report.
Okay, we have several personnel items. You can see the first one here is the recommendation to approve a resignation for one of our educational aides that will be moving. Number 2 is recommendation to approve new personnel, and this is in terms of a primary clinic aide, and Teresa Gray will be, or is at Vermont Primary School. Number 3, recommendation to approve college application boot camp readers. And so these are individuals that really support students, and they read student applications, give feedback to students. Great opportunity for kids to receive feedback. Number 4, recommendation to approve unpaid leave for these staff members. Number 5, recommendation for extended day services, and this is for this intervention specialist to support students with special needs that are in need of these unique services. Number 6, recommendation to approve the rescinding of this non-athletic supplemental contract, Jets Club. And it's due to some changes at the university level on what the opportunities were for students. It's not what it was before the pandemic. And so that change has caused the rescinding of that. The number 7, recommendation to approve these non-athletic supplemental contracts. You can see there, Science Olympiad, Math Counts, Student Council, great opportunities for students, and you'll see lots more coming up. Number 8, recommendation to approve these athletic supplemental contracts, the 2 that you see there. 9, recommendation to approve these volleyball camp workers. This is from camp this past summer. And similarly, number 10, to recommendation to approve these football camp workers that work during the summer. And what I love about the next page is the length at which you see these incredible student clubs. And so 11, 12, and 13 are recommendations to approve these renewals for student clubs that are offered to our students from the primary schools, the middle school, and the high school. And then looking down at number 14, it's a recommendation to approve these new high school clubs. And it's pretty amazing. And our students, I had my first conversation with high school seniors this past week, and so they spoke about the wonderful opportunities that they have, not just within the curriculum, within the school day, but in terms of clubs that they have available to them. And so the participation and the opportunity that students have to follow a passion that they have in a district our size like this is pretty phenomenal. Moving on, item B is a recommendation to approve the maintenance agreement with Love Grounds Maintenance. This is a 3-year contract. We are coming off of a previous 3-year contract with Love, and so it would be continuing to provide their services.
Right. And we did look into other possibilities, so this is by far the best
did.
choice. Okay, good. Oh, that's me.
That's it.
I need a motion to approve the superintendent's report. Sorry.
So moved.
Move all second. May I have a roll call?
Mrs. G?
Yes.
Mrs. Zoller?
Yes.
Mrs. Broderick?
Yes.
Mr. Buckner?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Tim, do you have an update for us?
I do. It's 8:47. I promise I won't go too long, but I do have a few things to share. First is just the appreciation that I have for our teachers and all the work that they're doing to focus in on utilizing data at all of our schools. It looks different in every school, but that effort is there, and it's intense, and it's meaningful. And again, trying to really focus in on curriculum, assessment, and then instruction. Everything is connected, and so just want to share my appreciation for the work that's happening throughout the district. The next topic I wanted to speak to just a little bit is masking, and specifically our universal masking plan. I have gotten a few questions about the COVID levels in our community in Hamilton County, and things are moving in a better direction. So it makes sense to be thinking about, okay, well, when will things be at a certain level to which we might be modifying our plan? So I wanted to speak about that just a little bit. If you recall back to the summer, we were looking at a list of data points as we were considering a universal masking plan. Those are the same data points that we're continuing to review. Our administrators are reviewing that. Our science advisory team is reviewing that information. Those things include local, state, and federal guidance. And I'll speak to guidance here in a little bit because we've seen a change today on a different topic. COVID-19 transmission rates, local vaccination coverage, legislation that it changes the scope of how we look at certain protocols, and then our school-based data and our district-based data. And so how many cases are we having here in Wyoming? So right now we're having those conversations about how this data is changing, and what's promising, and what questions we have about that data. So what's great is we're seeing a decrease in COVID transmission in Hamilton County. That's really good news. We're excited about that. We're actually seeing students ages 5 to 19, their COVID levels are going down. That was secondary to adults, and so we're seeing that change now. It's still high, but it's moving in the right direction, and we've talked about trend if you think back to the summer. We also know that we have growing vaccination rates for our students and staff, particularly at our high school. Also thinking about our high school, we've been reviewing cases, positive cases, and our high school has minimal numbers of cases, particularly in grades 9 through 12. So given that information, again, we're always wanting to look to identify the right time to modify our plans if needed. And so what I would propose is right now we don't have a November planning meeting. That's typical. We don't have a November planning meeting because we're attending a conference. And so I would propose we look to early November to schedule some time to pull together to talk about those 5 data sets that I'm speaking of, to see where we are in that time. Because in between now and November 10th, we might continue to see that trend down, which is great, which is exactly what we'd want to do, and I'd want to review all of these other facets. November 10th is not a typical Tuesday, it's a Wednesday. I don't know, I would be looking at the morning time frame. But if we're able to, I would propose that we come back and just at least have a conversation about what we're seeing.
I'd love to make sure we can get a look at the most recent data. What are the things that you would be considering changing to? So today we have what we call universal masking. Is it something you would say that people don't wear masks at all, or it's to their choice, or what are the considerations or the options that you may have?
That's a great question. It's a hard one to answer right now without, I wouldn't want to speculate on what that would look like without looking at the data. I know that, obviously the high school data looks better as we were just reviewing cases today. And so it pulls up the question of, does the middle school data look the same as the high school? Does the primary school data look the same as the high school? And if that is the case, then that might mean one thing. If it's not the case, it might mean another.
With the entire high school population eligible for vaccines, it could be that that's having some impact, among many other things. One of the things I wonder about too is, would we be able or willing to have a different policy in high school versus middle or elementary, or would that be constructive for clarity and consistency and those kinds of things? So those are the kinds of questions in my mind as we talk about a session on November 10th. And so I'd love to make sure we can get together and talk through the data as soon as we could.
Well, I was just going to say the state, even today, did some changing in terms of quarantine, which I think you're going to talk about. So between now and the 10th, we may have other.
Sure, we might have more data.
And then we already have the one bill that went into effect October the 13th that changed some of the ways we can look at data. So things will happen.
So being specific to cases, I think is very accurate information that might be the most actionable, we use that word, way that we can adjust if we think that all the other factors, it's all of those factors working together that really help us determine when's the most appropriate time. And so that would be a great opportunity for a conversation, I think. So the other topic, speaking of changes that came from the state level, today there was an adjustment in quarantine practices. And so the Ohio Department of Health was speaking to a change in quarantine protocols. And specifically, they're calling it, I don't know if it's still named this, mask to stay and test to play. Got to say that slowly.
Yeah, do that again.
Mask to stay, test to play. Okay, and so and this comes from the studies that were being done around students who were remaining in schools, not quarantining outside of the schools, and ultimately what the transmission rates were, COVID transmission rates were for those students. And the good news is that there's been a success in that they have not seen transmission rates that would warrant those students to continue quarantine outside of school. And so the changes in the guidance specifically say that due to that data showing minimal transmission of COVID through close contacts, schools may now incorporate quarantine guidelines that allow students to stay in school with masking, testing, and other protocols. So what that optional guidance would say is that what it would mean for us is that students that are close contacts in a school setting would be able to remain in school and may be able to remain in extracurricular activities. I say may, and we'll get into detail about that because I'll have Susie share some of the specifics of the information that was shared today. And so this connects with one of the goals that we've talked about. We talk about two main goals. How do we make sure that we're providing the safest environments possible for our students, and how do we connect kids within school learning? And there's a challenge. Obviously, we all know there's a challenge with quarantining and kids being pulled out of school. And so I wanted to talk about this change of guidance and then answer questions that you might have about how that works or what that looks like. So I'll turn to Susie if you have some of the very specific details. There's two pieces of this. This is for students that are close contacts in a school setting, and what would happen to those students in a school environment, and then what would happen to those students that are also participating in extracurricular activities.
So it's probably important to note that this was a recommendation today from the Ohio Department of Health that really only applies to K-12 schools. So anything that happens, exposures outside of schools, there are no changes currently to quarantine rules there. So masks to stay is purely talking about, applies to participation in the classroom. So what would happen there is that all direct contacts may remain in the classroom environment if they wear a mask for 14 days after the most recent date of exposure, if they self-monitor or parent monitor for symptoms during that time, and if they start to experience any symptoms, they immediately isolate and they test. And then the students and staff can discontinue these steps after 7 days if they don't develop symptoms and if they test negative between days 5 and 7. So those are like the 4 bullets specific to mask to stay.
Just to summarize, it's 14 days with mask unless you test at day 5 to 7 and confirm you're not positive.
Yes. Currently, we are universal masking. So a lot of that.
The other thing, the school's policy supersedes that. So for example, at Wyoming, right now we're in masks, so it wouldn't.
Which would mean people wouldn't have to quarantine.
It wouldn't matter, exactly.
Except for like the students who, like, say if we had students in the beginning of the year that quarantined because they were exposed, say at lunch, when their masks were off, is that right? Do I have that right? They would not necessarily need to quarantine now.
Yes, so any change here would really only apply to our students who have had to go into quarantine, which in Wyoming, that has been a very small number when compared to other schools. But yes, those students would now be able to stay in school and not need to quarantine at home for school-based activities. and I'm not talking about extracurricular activities yet, but I'm talking about school-based activities, which would be classroom setting, lunchroom, all of those things.
Unless they're exhibiting symptoms.
Yes, and if symptoms were to show up, then it's an immediate testing. Those are all of those things we do in our current communication around close contacts. Whether you're quarantining or not, we talk about that most recent exposure date. We talk about monitoring for those symptoms and taking these steps already. But yes. So then we talk about extracurriculars. And so Test to Play really recognizes the issues with maintaining distance and masking in some extracurricular activities. So we think it's likely, I mean, this just came today, so we're still kind of digesting it, but we think it's likely that there are a number of extracurricular activities where you can keep the same protocols in place as you can in a classroom. So that the classroom environment would apply to those, chess club or different things like that. There are some extracurricular activities that we have, such as sports or drama or some different things where maintaining that distance and staying masked is not necessarily, those are two that come to mind quickly, but so that is where Test to Play comes into place. So with Test to Play, those asymptomatic contacts who now can remain in the school setting, they may also continue to participate in extracurricular activities if they wear a mask when able. So in this application of this would include transportation, locker rooms, or any time that the mask will not interfere with breathing during the activity or create a safety hazard. So wear a mask when able, test on initial notification of exposure. So as soon as you are learning that you've been potentially exposed, you're immediately getting tested. And then testing again on day 5 through 7. And if it's negative at that time, then they test out of these protocols at that point. It's probably important to note that the testing was not like a do-it-yourself at home sort of a test. It is antigen or PCR, so both of those tests are applicable in this, but it is something, it's a proctored test. So you're going to a Hamilton County site or some other location, some point of care location to get that test.
And Susie, who pays for the testing?
That currently, we haven't really gotten to that place of that, but currently, because it's an outside organization, it would be the parent.
There's so many places you can go to have testing free, so, I mean.
And this is the state, this determination was made today, correct?
This is the Ohio Department of Health, a recommendation, yes, that just came out.
Do we assume the Hamilton County will?
Hamilton County's working with it right now to adjust
right.
their guides. So the way that it would work for us and within our plan is we would continue to contact trace like we always do. And we would notify families of close contacts just like we have done. And we would share the protocols that Susie has shared. And all of that direction would be provided to families. And then what we would do is we would follow up with any student that's in that test to play realm and make sure that we're helping them kind of navigate that process and do the things that they need to do to support their safety, number one, but then to be engaged in those activities that they can in a safe way.
Okay. So for clarity, prior to this changing guideline, say there's a volleyball player and they're close contact, they're identified. They could go to class but not necessarily go to the sport. Was that how it was before, but now they can if they follow the protocol?
What our protocol, I'd love it to be simple like that, but you know, but we can dig into that example. I mean, you would, if you're identified as contact, you know, then we would be looking at vaccination status and some different things. But because it is sports exposure, that, you know, sometimes so I'm assuming with this case, we've said that they're a contact and they're not vaccinated. Right. So that so yes, in that case, so they were quarantined from everything. They were not coming to school. They were not participating in extracurriculars. This would change that. Okay. So they would now come to school and they would immediately test As soon as they learn that they have been identified as a close contact, if they immediately test negative, and then they can continue with the sport, and then they would need to test again, in 5 to 7 days, and then they would be.
All right, thank you.
Two things it brings up. One, in the sporting place, when you say that the kid would have to wear a mask, if in this world where people weren't wearing masks on the buses and all of that, it just reminds me, like, in the places where sports aren't using the official, like, busing and all the other stuff, whether it's volleyball teams whose parents have to take them in various places, it would be helpful to just reinforce for the coaches and the parents and people connected with this, that masking universality should happen in those spaces in the same way that it does on the bus when they're going with the cars. We experienced this with our 7th grade volleyball team and other stuff, and so it's been a beneficial thing for us as our 7th grader then found out she had it, that our 10th grader could still go to school because they're wearing masks, and that wasn't a disruption for her. So thank you that we're wearing masks, so that's already benefiting our family with only having one of the students disrupted from the learning. So just a reminder, if we can support, those coaches and parents with reminding them on that. And the second point, I expect we're gonna have a conversation around, in this new world of not having to quarantine, why at the high school would we not be able to go to a place where students don't have to wear masks, and thus if they were exposed, they would. So it would only be in the case of the exposure because all of this, whatever. So as we come back to the conversations in the early November and then in late November, I think it's gonna be helpful for us to just look at that question and understand what does the data say and what is our rationale. I expect that's gonna be a legitimate question that people are asking about when we come back together.
Well, and I think, we've got a few more questions to answer. This is brand new. This comes out today. Guidance was just placed on the website. Like you said, the county is still, scrambling to get their guidance there. We've got a few questions to answer, but I would like to move forward with hearing this out with families and staff members when we're ready, which won't be long, but I want to make sure that we've got answers to all the questions that come up. And I do think that the November 10th opportunity to talk allows us to talk about both of these pieces. So we'll have our own data in terms of what do we see in terms of this change in quarantine guidance, but then also what are we seeing then with all the other sets of data and masking, and how do the two intersect, like you're saying, Ilya? I think that would be a great opportunity for that discussion.
All right. Is there anything else to your update?
But I can't not talk about, we've talked a lot about really, really deep things, and this is important, just celebrating our kids. It is, we're at the end of the first quarter, we're at the fall time where we've got music demonstrations and concerts for our kids. We've got our student athletes are participating in all the fall postseason efforts, and they've been just phenomenal. As athletes, but as representatives of Wyoming City Schools. So very, very exciting. Primary students are going to have a Halloween parade. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. Yeah. So woohoo, super excited about that. We've got a play, as Jeannie shared, coming up. They seem simple, but it's a big deal. Teaching and learning, climbing culture, and creating a place that kids fall in love with, no matter if you're in 1st grade or 12th grade, is important. And so we're excited about those things as much as we are about anything else.
Great, thank you. All right, may I have a motion to adjourn this meeting? This rather long meeting. May I have a second? All right, thank you. May I have a roll call?
Mrs. Aller?
Yes.
Mrs. Broderick?
Yes.
Mr. Buckner?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mrs. G?
Yes. Thank you. So normally there is a side wager going on among some of the people about under/over. Did we just give it up tonight and you just knew it was going too far? All right. Go.
Thank you to everybody who dedicated their time to come out and attend a board meeting.
Yes, thank you very much.
And stay to the end. Thank you.
Clap for yourself. Clap for yourself.